Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition, and we're starting a new book called Flow by Mihaly. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I'm not even going to try. I'll just call him Mr. C. Mihaly C. This book was inspired by an animated film I saw. I don't think it has any associations or relations, but I'll leave the link below. I talked about it in my introduction, and you can listen to that. And also you can look at the trailer and check out the movie. It's a really great animated little film, and I believe it won the Academy Award for Best Animated uh, Picture. So congratulations. So today we'll start with chapter 1. Get that open. Now, how this works is that I highlighted some words and phrases, and this is to tell me that there is a footnote at the end of the book. So what I'll do here is I'll read the paragraph, and then I'll flip to the back of the book and read the notes. So that's kind of how it's going to go. Okay. And I hope you guys will enjoy this book. I've heard a lot about it, this book. I just haven't read it, so I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so let's do it. Chapter 1, Happiness Revisited. Oh, let me move the camera in just a little bit so you guys can follow. If you have your own book, you can follow with that too. And I'll put a link for the Amazon link to buy the book if you want. Okay, introduction. 2,300 years ago, Aristotle concluded that more than anything else, men and women seek happiness. While happiness itself is sought for its own sake, every other goal, health, beauty, money, or power, is valued only because we expect that it will make us happy. Much has changed since Aristotle's time. Our understanding of the worlds of stars and of atoms has expanded beyond belief. The gods of the Greeks are like helpless children compared to humankind today and the powers we now wield. And yet, on this most important issue, very little has changed in the intervening centuries. We do not understand what happiness is any better than Aristotle did. And as for learning how to attain that blessed condition, one could argue that we have made no progress at all. There's a footnote on the back about happiness. Okay. Aristotle's views of happiness are most clearly developed in the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1 and Book 9, chapters 9 and 10. Contemporary research on happiness by psychologists and other social scientists started relatively late, but has recently begun to catch up with this important topic in earnest. One of the first and still very influential works in this field has been Norman Bradburn's The Structure of Psychological Well-Being, Bradburn, 1969, which pointed out that happiness and unhappiness were independent of each other. In other words, just because a person is happy, it does not mean he can't also be unhappy at the same time. Dr. Ruud Veenhoven at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, has recently published a data book of happiness, which summarizes 245 surveys conducted in 32 countries between 1911 and 1975, Veenhoven, 1984. A second volume is in preparation. The Archimedes Foundation of Toronto, Canada, has also set at its task the keeping track of investigations of human happiness and well-being. Its first directory appeared in 1988. The Psychology of Happiness by the Oxford social psychologist Michael Argyll was published in 1987. Another comprehensive collection of ideas and research in this area is the volume by Strack, Argyll, and Schwartz, 1990. Despite the fact that we are now healthier and grow to be older, despite the fact that even the least affluent among us are surrounded by material luxuries undreamed of even a few decades ago. There were few bathrooms in the palace of the Sun King. Chairs were rare even in the richest medieval houses, and no Roman emperor could turn on a TV set when he was bored. And air conditioning, our air conditioning too. Oh, that's a godsend. And regardless of all the stupendous scientific knowledge we can summon at will, people often end up feeling that their lives have been wasted, that instead of being filled with happiness, their years were spent in anxiety and boredom. And there's a footnote about the luxuries. Undreamed of material luxuries. Good recent accounts of the conditions of everyday life in past centuries can be found in a series under the general editorship of Felipe Aries and Georges Duby, entitled A History of Private Life. The first volume, From Pagan Rome to Byzantium, edited by Paul Veyni, was published here in 1987. Another magisterial series on the same topic as Ferdinand Brudel's The Structures of Everyday Life, whose first volume appeared in English in 1981. For the changes in home furnishings, see also Leroy Ledure, sounds French, 1979, and oh, okay, oh boy, that's his name, huh? Csikszentmihalyi. Ooh, I hope I pronounced that right. And Rockbert Helton, 1981. Okay. Is this because it is the destiny of mankind to remain unfulfilled, each person always wanting more than he or she can have? Or is the pervasive melee that often sours even our most precious moments the result of our seeking happiness in the wrong places? The intent of this book is to use some of the tools of modern psychology to explore this very ancient question. When do people feel most happy? If we could begin to find an answer to it, perhaps we can eventually be able to order life so that happiness will play a larger part in it. 25 years before I began to write these lines, I made a discovery that took all the intervening time for me to realize I had made. I call it a discovery. To call it a discovery is perhaps misleading, for people have been aware of it since the dawn of time. Yet the word is appropriate because even though my finding itself was well known, it had not been described or theoretically explained by the relevant branch of scholarship, which in this case happens to be psychology. So I spent the next quarter century investigating this elusive phenomenon. What I discovered was that happiness is not something that happens. It's a state of mind, I think, my opinion, state of being. It is not the result of good fortune or random chance. It is not something that money can buy or power command. It does not depend on outside events, but rather on how we interpret them. Happiness, in fact, is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. Each people who learn to control inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their lives, which is as close as any of us can come to being happy. It's an inner journey, isn't it? Yet we cannot reach happiness by consciously searching for it. Ask yourself whether you are happy, said J.S. Mill, and you will cease to be so. It is by being fully involved with every detail of our lives, whether good or bad, that we find happiness, not by trying to look for it directly. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychologist, summarized it beautifully in the preface to his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must be ensued as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a course greater than oneself. So how can we reach this elusive goal that cannot be attained by a direct route? My studies of the past quarter century have convinced me that there is a way. It is a circuitous path that begins with achieving control over the contents of our consciousness. Our perceptions about our lives are the outcomes of many forces that shape experience, each having an impact on whether we feel good or bad. Most of these forces are outside our control. There is not much we can do about our looks, our temperament, or our constitution. We cannot decide, at least so far, how tall we will grow, how smart we will get. We can choose neither parents nor time of birth, and it is not in your power or mine to decide whether there will be a war or a depression. The instructions contained in our genes, the pull of gravity, the pollen in the air, the historical period into which we are born, these and innumerable other conditions determine what we see, how we feel, what we do. It is not surprising that we should believe that our fate is primarily ordained by outside agencies. Yet we have all experienced times when, instead of being buffeted by anonymous forces, we do feel in control of our actions, masters of our own fate. On the rare occasions that it happens, we feel a sense of exhilaration, a deep sense of enjoyment that is long cherished, and that becomes a landmark in memory for what life should be like. This is what we mean by optimal experience. It is what the sailor holding the tight course feels when the wind whips through her hair, when the boat lunges through the waves like a colt, sails whole wind and sea humming a harmony that vibrates in the sailor's veins. It is what a painter feels when the colors on the canvas begin to set up a magnetic tension with each other, and a new thing, a living form, takes shape in front of the astonished creator. Or it is the feeling a father has when his child for the first time responds to his smile. Such events do not occur only when the external conditions are favorable, however. People who have survived concentration camps or who have lived through near fatal physical dangers often recall that in the midst of their ordeal, they experienced extraordinary rich epiphanies in response to such simple events as hearing the song of a bird in the forest, completing a hard task, or sharing a crust of bread with a friend. Contrary to what we usually believe, moments like these, the best moments in our lives, are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. Although such experiences can also be enjoyable, if we have worked hard to attain them, the best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is thus something that we make happen. For a child, it could be placing with trembling fingers the last block on a tower she has built, higher than any she has built so far. For a swimmer, it could be trying to beat his own record. For a violinist, mastering an intricate musical passage. For each person, there are thousands of opportunities, challenges to expand ourselves. Such experiences are not necessarily pleasant at the time they occur. The swimmer's muscles might have ached during his most memorable race. His lungs might have felt like exploding, and he might have been dizzy with fatigue. Yet these could have been the best moments of his life. Getting control of life is never easy, and sometimes it can be definitely painful. But in the long run, optimal experiences add up to a sense of mastery, or perhaps better, a sense of participation in determining the content of life that comes as close to what is usually meant by happiness as anything else we can conceivably imagine. In the course of my studies, I tried to understand as exactly as possible how people felt when they most enjoyed themselves and why. My first studies involved a few hundred experts, artists, athletes, musicians, chess masters, and surgeons. In other words, people who seemed to spend their time in precisely those activities they preferred. From their accounts of what it felt like to do what they were doing, I developed a theory of optimal experience based on the concept of flow, the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. And there's a footnote on flow. Flow. My work on optimal experience began with my doctoral dissertation, which involved the study of how young artists went about creating a painting. Some of the results were reported in the book, The Creative Vision, Getzo's and Csikszentmihalyi. Oh, sorry, Mr. C, for butchering your name. 1976. Since then, several dozen scholarly articles have appeared on the subject. The first book that described the flow experience directly was Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, Mr. C, 1975. The latest summary of the academic research on the flow experience was collected in the edited volume, Optimal Experience, Psychological Studies of Flow in Consciousness, Mr. C and Mr. C, 1988. With the help of this theoretical model, my research team at the University of Chicago and afterward, colleagues around the world interviewed thousands of individuals from many different walks of life. These studies suggested that optimal experiences were described in the same way by men and women, by young people and old, regardless of cultural differences. The flow experience was not just a peculiarity of affluent industrialized elites. It was reported in essentially the same words by old women from Korea, by adults in Thailand and India, by teenagers in Tokyo, by Navajo shepherds, by farmers in the Italian Alps, and by workers on the assembly line in Chicago. In the beginning, our data consisted of interviews and questionnaires. To achieve greater precision, we developed with time, a new method for measuring the quality of subjective experience. This technique, called the experience sampling method, involves asking people to wear an electronic paging device for a week and to write down how they feel and what they're thinking about whenever the pager signals. The pager is activated by a radio transmitter about 8 times each day at random intervals. At the end of the week, each respondent provides what amounts to a running record, a written film clip of his or her life made of selections from its representative moments. By now, over 100,000 such cross sections of experience have been collected from different parts of the world. The conclusions of this volume are based on that body of data. And there's a footnote about the experience sampling method. Experience sampling method. I first used this technique in a study of adult workers in 1978. Adult workers. What kind of workers? Interesting wording. Okay, the first publication concerned a study of adolescents, Mr. C, Larson and Prescott, 1977. Detailed descriptions of the method are available in Mr. C and Larson, 1984, 1987. The study of flow I began at the University of Chicago was now spread worldwide. Researchers in Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Australia have taken up its investigation. At present, the most extensive collection of data outside of Chicago is at the Institute of Psychology of the Medical School, the University of Milan, Italy. The concept of flow has been found useful by psychologists who study happiness, life satisfaction, and intrinsic motivation, by sociologists who see in it the opposite of anomie and alienation, by anthropologists who are interested in the phenomena of collective effervescence and rituals. Some have extended the implications of flow to attempts to understand the evolution of mankind, others to illuminate religious experience. But flow is not just an academic subject. Only a few years after it was published, the theory began to be applied to a variety of practical issues. Whenever the goal is to improve the quality of life, the flow theory can point the way. It has inspired the creation of experimental school curricula, the training of business executives, the design of leisure products and services, Flow is being used to generate ideas and practices in clinical psychotherapy, the rehabilitation of juvenile delinquents, the organization of activities in old people's homes, the design of museum exhibits, the occupational therapy with the handicapped. All this has happened within a dozen years after the first articles on flow appeared in scholarly journals. And the indications are that the impact of the theory is going to be even stronger in the years to come. And there's a footnote on the applied word. Okay. Applications of the flow concept. These are described in the first chapter of Optimal Experience. Mr. C and Mr. C, 1988. Overview. Although many articles and books on flow have been written for the specialist, this is the first time that the research on optimal experience is being presented to the general reader and its implications for individual lives discussed. But what follows is not going to be a how-to book. There are literally thousands of such volumes in print or on the remainder shelves of bookstores explaining how to get rich, powerful, loved, or slim. Like cookbooks, they tell you how to accomplish a specific limited goal on which few people actually follow through. Yet, even if their advice were to work, there would be the result afterward. What would be the result afterward in the unlikely event that one did turn into a slim, well-loved, powerful millionaire? Usually what happens is that the person finds himself back at square one with a new list of wishes, just as dissatisfied as before. What would really satisfy people is not getting slim or rich, but feeling good about their lives. In the quest for happiness, partial solutions don't work. However well-intentioned, books cannot give recipes for how to be happy because optimal experience depends on the ability to control what happens in consciousness moment by moment. Each person has to achieve it on the basis of his own individual efforts and creativity. What a book can do, however, and what this one will try to accomplish, is to present examples of how life can be made more enjoyable, ordered in the framework of a theory for readers to reflect upon and from which they may then draw their own conclusion. Rather than presenting a list of do's and don'ts, the book intends to be a voyage through the realms of the mind, charted with the tools of science. Like all adventures worth having, um, Like all adventures worth having, it will not be an easy one. Without some intellectual effort, a commitment to reflect and think hard about your own experience, you will not gain much from what follows. Flow will examine the process of achieving happiness through control over one's inner life. We shall begin by considering how consciousness works and how it is controlled, Chapter 2, because only if we understand the way subjective states are shaped can we master them. Everything we experience, joy or pain, interest or boredom, is represented in the mind as information. If we're able to control this information, we can decide what our lives will be like. The optimal state of inner experience is one in which there is order in consciousness. This happens when psychic energy or attention is invested in realistic goals and when skills match the opportunities for action. The pursuit of a goal brings order in awareness because a person must concentrate attention on the task at hand and momentarily forget everything else. These periods of struggling to overcome challenges are what people find to be the most enjoyable time of their lives. Chapter 3. A person who has achieved control over psychic energy and has invested in it, consciously chosen goals cannot help but grow into a more complex being. By stretching skills, by reaching toward higher challenges, such a person becomes an increasingly extraordinary individual. There's a footnote about goals. Goals. The earliest explanations of human behavior, starting with Aristotle, assume that actions were motivated by goals. Modern psychology, however, has shown that much of what people much of what people do can be explained more parsimoniously by simpler, often unconscious causes. As a result, the importance of goals in directing behavior has been greatly discredited. Some exceptions include Alfred Adler, 1956, who believed that people develop goal hierarchies that inform their decisions throughout life, and the American psychologists Gordon Allport, 1955, and Abraham Maslow in 1968, who believe that after more basic needs are satisfied, goals may begin to be effective in directing actions. Goals have also regained some credibility in cognitive psychology, where researchers such as Miller, Gallanter, and Pribram, 1960, Mandler, 1975, Nesser, 1976, and MD, 1980, have used the concept to explain decision-making sequences and the regulation of behavior. I do not claim that most people, most of the time, act the way they do because they're trying to achieve goals, but only that when they do so, they experience a sense of control, which is absent when behavior is not motivated by consciously chosen goals. See Mr. C, 1989. To understand why some things we do are more enjoyable than others, we shall review the conditions of the flow experience, chapter 4. Flow is the way people describe their state of mind when consciousness is harmoniously ordered and they want to pursue whatever they are doing for its own sake. In reviewing some of the activities that consistently produce flow, such as sports, games, art, and hobbies, it becomes easier to understand what makes people happy. But one cannot rely solely on games and art to improve the quality of life. To achieve control over what happens in the mind, one can draw upon an almost infinite range of opportunities or enjoyment. For instance, through the use of physical and sensory skills, ranging from athletics to music to yoga, chapter 5, or through the development of symbolic skills such as poetry, philosophy, or mathematics, chapter 6. Most people spend the largest part of their lives working and interacting with others, especially with members of their families. Therefore, it is crucial that one learn to transform jobs into flow producing activities, chapter 7, and to think of ways of making relations with parents, spouses, children, and friends more enjoyable, chapter 8. Many lives are disrupted by tragic accidents, and even the most fortunate are subjected to stresses of various kinds. Yet such blows do not necessarily diminish happiness. It is how people respond to stress that determines whether they will profit from misfortune or be miserable. Chapter 9 describes ways in which people manage to enjoy life despite adversity. And finally, the last step will be to describe how people manage to join all experience into a meaningful pattern, chapter 10. When that is accomplished and a person feels in control of life and feels that it makes sense, there is nothing left to desire. The fact that one is not slim, rich, or powerful no longer matters. The tide of rising expectations is stilled. Unfulfilled needs no longer trouble the mind. Even the most humdrum experiences become enjoyable. Buddhism talks about that, being in the moment, being in the, what is it called? Being in the moment, being mindful in the moment, whatever it is that you do, even the most mundane activities. Yeah, being mindful, that's right. Thus, flow will explore what is involved in reaching these aims. How is consciousness controlled? How is it ordered so as to make experience enjoyable? How is complexity achieved? And last, how can meaning be created? The way to achieve these goals is relatively easy in theory, yet quite difficult in practice. The rules themselves are clear enough and within everyone's reach, but many forces, both within ourselves and in the environment, stand in the way. It is little like trying to lose weight. Everyone knows what it takes. Everyone wants to do it. Yet it is next to impossible for so many. The stakes here are higher, however. It is not just a matter of losing a few extra pounds. It is a matter of losing the chance to have a life worth living. Before describing how the optimal flow experience can be attained, it is necessary to review briefly some of the obstacles to fulfillment implicit in the human condition. In the old stories, before living happily ever after, the hero had to confront fiery dragons and wicked warlocks in the course of a quest. Sounds like the hero's journey. What is that guy's name? Joseph Campbell. Yes, Joseph Campbell. Excellent author. Beautiful stories that he wrote. Interesting. Okay, sorry, I got distracted there for a minute. This metaphor applies to the exploration of the psyche as well. I shall argue that the primary reason it is so difficult to achieve happiness centers on the fact that, contrary to the myths mankind has developed to reassure itself, the universe was not created to answer our needs. Frustration is deeply woven into the fabric of life, and whenever some of our needs are temporarily met, we immediately start wishing for more. This chronic dissatisfaction is the second obstacle that stands in the way of contentment. To deal with these obstacles, every culture develops with time protective devices, religions, philosophies, arts, and comforts that help shield us from chaos. They help us believe that we are in control of what is happening and give reasons for being satisfied with our lot. But these shields are effective only for a while. After a few centuries, sometimes after only a few decades, a religion or belief wears out and no longer provides the spiritual sustenance it once did. When people try to achieve happiness on their own without the support of a faith, they usually seek to maximize pleasures that are either biologically programmed in their genes or are out as attractive by the society in which they live. Wealth, power, and sex become the chief goals that give direction to their strivings. But the quality of life cannot be improved this way. They only direct control of experience. The ability to derive moment by moment enjoyment from everything we do can overcome the obstacles to fulfillment. The roots of discontent. The foremost reason that happiness is so hard to achieve is that the universe was not designed with the comfort of human beings in mind. It is almost immeasurably huge, and most of it is hostilely empty and cold. It is the setting for great violence, as when occasionally a star explodes, turning to ashes everything within billions of miles. The rare planet whose gravity field would not crush our bones is probably swimming in lethal gases. Even planet Earth, which can be so idyllic and picturesque, is not to be taken for granted. To survive on it, men and women have had to struggle for millions of years against ice, fire, floods, wild animals, and invisible microorganisms that appear out of nowhere to snuff us out. It seems that every time a pressing danger is avoided, a new and more sophisticated threat appears on the horizon. No sooner do we invent a new substance than its byproducts start poisoning the environment. Throughout history, weapons that were designed to provide security have turned around and threatened to destroy their makers. As some diseases are curbed, new ones become virulent. And if for a while morality is reduced, then overpopulation starts to haunt us. The four grim horsemen of the apocalypse are never very far away. The earth may be our only home, but it is a home full of booby traps waiting to go off at any moment. That's an interesting worldview. There is some truth to that. It is not the universe. It is not that the universe is random in an abstract mathematical sense. The motions of the stars, the transformations of energy that occur in it, might be predicted and explained well enough. But natural processes do not take human desires into account. They are deaf and blind to our needs, and thus they are random in contrast with the order we attempt to establish through our goals. A meteorite on a collision course with New York City might be obeying all the laws of the universe, but it would still be a damn nuisance. The virus that attacks the cells of a Mozart is only doing what comes naturally. Even though it inflicts a grave loss on humankind, the universe is not hostile. nor yet is it friendly, in the words of J.H. Holmes. It is simply indifferent. Chaos is one of the oldest concepts in myth and religion. It is rather foreign to the physical and biological sciences because in terms of their laws, the events in the cosmos are perfectly reasonable. For instance, chaos theory in the sciences attempts to describe regularities in what appears to be utterly random. But chaos has a different meaning in psychology and the other human sciences, because if human goals and desires are taken as the starting point, there is irreconcilable disorder in the cosmos. And there's a footnote on chaos. Chaos. It might seem strange that a book which deals with optimal experience should be concerned with the chaos of the universe. The reason for this is that the value of life cannot be understood except against the background of its problems and dangers. Ever since the first known work of literature, the Gilgamesh, was written 35 centuries ago, Mason 1971, it has been customary to start with a review of the fall review of the fall before venturing to suggest ways to improve the human condition. Perhaps the best prototype is Dante's Divina Commedia, where the reader first has to pass through the gates of hell. Per me se va nel eterno dolore, before he or she can contemplate a solution to the predicaments of life. In this context, we're following these illustrious exemplars, not because of a sense of tradition, but because it makes good sense psychologically. There is not much that we as individuals can do to change the way the universe runs. In our lifetime, we exert little influence over the forces that interfere with our well-being. It is important to do as much as we can to prevent nuclear war, to abolish social justice, to eradicate hunger and disease. But it is prudent not to expect that efforts to change external conditions will immediately improve the quality of our lives. As J.S. Mill wrote, no great improvements in the lot of mankind are possible until a great change takes place in the fundamental constitution of their modes of thoughts. How we feel about ourselves, the joy we get from living, ultimately depend directly on how the mind filters and interprets everyday experiences. Whether we are happy depends on inner harmony, not on the controls we're able to exert over the great forces of the universe. Certainly, we should keep on learning how to master the external environment because our physical survival may depend on it. But such mastery is not going to add one jot to how good we as individuals feel, or reduce the chaos of the world as we experience it. To do that, we must learn to achieve mastery over consciousness itself. Each of us has a picture, however vague, of what we would like to accomplish before we die. How close we get to attaining this goal becomes the measure of the quality of our lives. If it remains beyond reach, we grow resentful or resigned. If it is at least in part achieved, we experience a sense of happiness and satisfaction. For the majority of people on this earth, life goals are simple: to survive, to leave children who will in turn survive, and if possible, to do so with a certain amount of comfort and dignity. In the favelas, spreading around South American cities, in the drought-stricken regions of Africa, among the millions of Asians who have to solve the problem of hunger day after day, there is not much else to hope for. But as soon as these basic problems of survival are solved, merely having enough food and a comfortable shelter is no longer sufficient to make people content. New needs are felt, new desires arise. With affluence and power come escalating expectations. And as our level of wealth and comforts keeps increasing, the sense of well-being we hope to achieve keeps receding into the distance. When Cyrus the Great had 10,000 cooks prepare new dishes for his table, the rest of Persia had barely enough to eat. These days, every household in the first world has access to the recipes of the most diverse lands and can duplicate the feasts of past emperors. But does this make us more satisfied? And there are footnotes on those two. Let me see here. Okay. All right, hierarchy of needs. The best known formulation of the relationship between lower order needs, such as survival and safety, and higher goals like self-actualization is the one by Abraham Maslow, 1968 and 1971. Escalating expectations. According to many authors, chronic dissatisfaction with the status quo is a feature of modernity. The quintessential modern man, Ghost Faust, was given power by the devil on condition that he never be satisfied with what he has. A good recent treatment of this theme can be found in Burma, 1982. It is more likely, however, that hankering for more than what one has is a fairly universal human trait, probably concerned with the development of probably connected with the development of consciousness. That happiness and satisfaction with life depend on how small a gap one perceives between what one wishes for and what one possesses, and that expectations tend to rise have been often observed. For instance, in a poll conducted in 1987 and reported in the Chicago Tribune, September 24, Sect 1, page 3, Americans making more than $100,000 a year, who constitute 2% of the population, believe that to live in comfort, they would need $88,000 a year. Those who earn less think $30,000 would be sufficient. The more affluent also said that they would need $250,000 to fulfill their dreams, while the price tag on the average American's dream was only 1/5 that sum. One of the scholars who have been studying the quality of life, many have reported similar findings, e.g. Campbell, Converse, and Rogers, 1976, Davis, 1959, Lewin et al., 1944, 1962, Martin, 1981, Mikalos, 1985, and Williams, 1975. These approaches, however, tend to focus on the extrinsic conditions of happiness, such as health, financial affluence, and so on. The approach of this book is concerned instead with happiness that results from a person's actions. This paradox of rising expectations suggests that improving the quality of life might be an insurmountable task. In fact, there is no inherent problem in our desire to escalate our goals, as long as we enjoy the struggle along the way. The problem arises when people are so fixated on what they want to achieve that they cease to derive pleasure from the present. When that happens, they forfeit their chance of contentment. Though the evidence suggests that most people are caught up on this frustrating treadmill of rising expectations, many individuals have found ways to escape it. These are people who, regardless of their material conditions, have been able to improve the quality of their lives, who are satisfied, and who have a way of making those around them also a bit more happy. Such individuals lead vigorous lives, are open to a variety of experiences, keep on learning until the day they die, and have strong ties and commitments to other people and to the environment in which they live. They enjoy whatever they do, even if tedious or difficult. They are hardly ever bored, and they can take in stride anything that comes their way. Perhaps their greatest strength is that they are in control of their lives. We shall see later how they have managed to reach this state. But before we do so, we need to review some of the devices that have been developed over time as protection against the threat of chaos, and the reasons why such external defenses often do not work. There's a footnote on that. Controlling one's life. The effort to achieve self-control is one of the oldest goals in human psychology. In a lucid summary of several hundred writings of different intellectual traditions aimed at increasing self-control, e.g. yoga, various philosophies, psychoanalysis, personality psychology, self-help, Klausner, 1965, found that the objects to which control was directed could be summarized in 4 categories. 1, control of performance or behavior. 2, control of underlying physiological drives. 3, control of intellectual functions, i.e. thinking. 4, control of emotions, i.e. feeling. All right. We will stop there for now. Well, I hope you enjoyed that so far. And we will continue part 2. This is part 1. We'll continue part 2 next week. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day. And we'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye now.